Hello everyone, welcome to my channel.
The day of my father's funeral should have been about grief, not betrayal. But before the coffin was even lowered, my stepmother, Sabrina, rose from her seat, her black veil trembling as she spoke. "She's not Louis Whitmore's real daughter." Every whisper that followed cut through me like glass. Faces turned, murmurs spread. I wanted to scream, to vanish, but I stood frozen beside my father's casket, the scent of lilies and lies choking the air. I'd lost my father once to death, and again to her words. A week later, we gathered for the reading of his will. Sabrina came prepared with a DNA test, determined to erase my name from his legacy. But when the lawyer opened a sealed envelope, my father had left. For the day anyone questions my daughter's blood, the truth inside didn't just silence the room, it destroyed her. People always said I had the perfect life. A mansion outside Austin, a father who built an empire from nothing, private schools, charity galas, expensive smiles. But what they didn't see was the silence between the walls. My father, Louis Whitmore, was a man of precision, every word measured, every plan executed like an equation. He built Whitmore Energy from a single gas station into a statewide chain. To the world, he was a legend. To me, he was a stranger who happened to tuck me in at night. My mother died when I was 6. I still remember the soft scent of her lavender perfume, the hum she made when braiding my hair, the lullaby that faded before she finished the last verse. When she was gone, the house became quieter, not because people stopped talking, but because warmth stopped living there. 3 years later, Sabrina arrived. I was 9 when my father remarried. She was beautiful, perfectly groomed hair, eyes the color of frost, a voice that could charm an entire room and still leave you cold inside. At the wedding, she called me sweetheart. By the next morning, it became Clara. Soon after, Liam was born, my half-brother, the center of her world. Every photograph, every birthday, every story revolved around him. If I entered the room, her smile tightened, as if my presence interrupted a perfect portrait. "Don't slouch, Clara," she'd say when guests were around. "You represent this family now." I learned early that appearances were sacred in the Whitmore household. Emotions? Not so much. My father didn't notice the coldness. He worked long hours, expanding his business, attending conferences, shaking hands with politicians. When he came home, I'd run to greet him, and he'd smile, pat my shoulder, then drift into his office with Sabrina following close behind. Their laughter through closed doors made me feel like a ghost haunting my own house. At 12, I started spending time at Whitmore Energy's local station, watching the employees, studying the ledgers, helping the mechanics. It was the only place I felt seen. The workers called me Little Boss. I loved that. When I told Dad I wanted to learn business, he actually looked proud. "You've got your mother's fire," he said once. "If you stay focused, the company will be yours someday." I remember Sabrina's face that night, the polite clink of her wine glass, the flash of annoyance before she smiled again. "She's young, Louis," she said. "Let her enjoy life before you drown her in numbers." "Discipline never hurt anyone," he replied. "It builds character." She laughed softly, but her eyes said something else. "We'll see." From that moment, the tension grew subtle, unspoken, but sharp enough to cut. Every time I succeeded, Sabrina reminded me how easily things could be taken away. "You're smart, Clara," she'd whisper once. "But smart girls forget that blood matters more than brains." I didn't understand what she meant back then. Now, I wish I had. Because years later, those same words would come back to destroy everything. Still, I worked hard: college, internships, promotions. By 26, I was managing key operations under my father's supervision. We weren't close, but he began to trust me, to see what I could do. He even smiled more often, those rare, fleeting smiles that made every effort worth it. I thought things were finally changing. I thought, for once, I belonged. But looking back, that calm was just the quiet before the storm. It was a Thursday evening when my father called for a family dinner. That alone was unusual. He hated interruptions during the work week. When I came downstairs, the dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal glasses, white linen napkins, silver cutlery shining beneath the chandelier. The air felt heavy. Sabrina sat across from me, her back perfectly straight, the faint scent of roses mixing with the smell of roasted lamb. Liam scrolled through his phone, oblivious as usual. My father, in his usual charcoal suit, sat at the head of the table. He looked different, softer, almost nervous. "Clara," he said, clearing his throat, "I wanted us to have dinner as a family tonight. There's something I need to say." The knife in my hand froze. He turned toward me, eyes calm but resolute. "You've worked hard these past years. You've grown the company, proven yourself. I've decided it's time." "Time for what?" I asked cautiously. He smiled faintly. "For you to take over Whitmore Energy." The words hit like thunder. For a moment, I thought I misheard him. "Dad, what?" "Starting next quarter, you'll be officially in charge. You've earned it." The room went still. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop. Sabrina blinked, her wine glass trembling slightly before she set it down. "You're giving her control of the company?" Her tone was calm, too calm. It was the same tone she used when a waiter brought her the wrong wine before she sent it back and never returned to that restaurant again. "She's ready," my father said simply. "She's young, Louis," Sabrina countered. "She doesn't understand legacy or responsibility. And yet she's been running 3 branches more efficiently than anyone else," he replied. Liam looked up from his phone. "You're serious?" he asked, incredulous. "You said I'd learn the business one day." "You will," Dad said. "But your sister, half-sister," Sabrina interrupted softly, her smile tight. The words sliced through me. I'd heard it before, whispered behind my back, but never from her lips. Never like that. Dad's jaw tightened. "Clara is my daughter," he said firmly. "And she's proven herself." "And for..." Sabrina's eyes flickered. For a brief second, something darker surfaced. Anger, jealousy, fear, before her mask returned. "If that's what you want," she said, standing abruptly, "then I hope you know what you're doing." She excused herself and walked out, the sound of her heels echoing down the marble hallway. Liam followed a moment later, muttering under his breath, "Guess blood doesn't matter anymore." When the door slammed, only the soft clink of cutlery remained. Dad sighed and leaned back. "Ignore them," he said. "They'll come around." But his voice lacked conviction. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. He reached for his glass, then stopped mid-motion. "Clara," he said quietly, "whatever happens next, remember this, I'm proud of you." That sentence should have felt like a blessing. Instead, it felt like a goodbye. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the dinner, Sabrina's glare, Liam's resentment, my father's weary smile. Something was shifting beneath the surface. Something I couldn't name. When morning came, I found a note on the kitchen counter in my father's handwriting. "Meeting in Dallas. Back by Sunday. Love, Dad." I didn't know that those would be the last words he ever wrote to me. 2 nights after that dinner, the rain came. Not the gentle kind, the kind that pounds against windows like fists. I stayed late at the office, reviewing quarterly numbers, replaying every word from that evening in my head. Sabrina's cold stare, Dad's quiet pride, Liam's bitterness. Something inside me whispered that peace never lasts in the Whitmore house. At 10:47 p.m., my phone rang. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. "Austin Central Hospital." "Miss Whitmore?" the voice said, trembling. "Your father has been in a serious accident on Highway 71. You need to come immediately." I didn't remember hanging up. Just the sound of rain swallowing the city as I drove through red lights, heart hammering so loud it drowned the thunder. When I reached the emergency entrance, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of antiseptic clung to everything. Sabrina was already there, perfectly composed, in a black coat, her eyes red but dry. Liam stood beside her, pale and shaking. "What happened?" I gasped. "A truck lost control," the doctor said, stepping forward. "Your father's car flipped. He's in critical condition. We need blood transfusions now. His type is O negative, very rare. We'll need to test the family." They drew our blood in silence. I watched crimson fill the vials, wishing that somehow love could be measured that easily. 15 minutes later, the doctor returned. "Liam's a match," he said. "We'll begin immediately." I exhaled, relief flooding me, until I noticed Sabrina staring at the results sheet in her hand, her expression unreadable. A positive? She murmured, looking up at me. That's your blood type, Miss Whitmore? The doctor confirmed gently. Yes, I replied, confused. Why? Her tone turned cold. That's not possible, she said slowly. Louis is O negative. I frowned. So? Sabrina's voice sharpened. So it means he can't be your biological father. The room tilted. Excuse me? Doctor, she continued, ignoring me completely. I want a DNA test between my husband and Clara. I felt the ground vanish beneath me. Are you insane? I shouted. He's fighting for his life, and you want a test? If he's truly her father, the results will prove it, she said coolly. Even the doctor looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, this isn't the right time. Do it, she ordered, her voice cutting like glass. I turned to Liam, desperate. Tell her to stop, please, but he just looked away. The nurse drew another sample from my arm while my hands trembled uncontrollably. Outside, lightning split the sky in two. Hours blurred. Every time the doors of the operating room opened, I jumped. When the doctor finally came out, his face said everything. I'm sorry, he said quietly. We did everything we could. The words didn't register. I just stared at his lips moving, hearing nothing but static in my ears. My father, the man who taught me how to stand straight, how to fight, how to lead, was gone. Sabrina gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. No tears. Just shock. Perfectly measured. Liam sobbed into her shoulder. I stood frozen. Then I saw her hand slide into her coat pocket, clutching something tightly, a folded document. What is that? I demanded. Proof, she said, her tone icy calm. Proof that truth always comes out. That was the moment I realized she hadn't just lost a husband. She had found a weapon, and she planned to use it. The morning of my father's funeral was unnaturally bright. The kind of sky that feels wrong for mourning. St. Mary's Church was filled with people, family, employees, old friends, reporters pretending to be mourners. White lilies lined the aisle, their scent so thick it made me dizzy. I stood by the casket, staring at his still face, trying to breathe through the weight pressing on my chest. He looked peaceful, almost asleep, as if he might open his eyes and tell me everything would be okay. But the silence screamed otherwise. Sabrina sat in the front pew, veil drawn over her face, holding Liam's hand like a grieving saint. I should have known then that her calm wasn't grief, it was calculation. When the priest finished his sermon, he invited anyone who wished to speak to step forward. I wanted to say something to thank my father, to promise I'd make him proud, but before I could move, Sabrina rose. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. Every head turned. She walked to the altar with slow, deliberate steps, her black dress shimmering under the stained glass light. Before we say our final goodbye to Louis Whitmore, she began, her voice clear and controlled, there is something I need to share, something the public, and this family, deserves to know. My stomach twisted. No. Not here. Sabrina, Aunt Margaret whispered sharply. This isn't the time. The truth doesn't wait for time. She interrupted smoothly. She turned to the crowd, her gloved hands trembling ever so slightly, just enough to look fragile. Clara Whitmore, she said, her voice echoing through the church, is not Louis Whitmore's biological daughter. For a second, the world stopped moving, then gasps filled the air. A man dropped his prayer book. Someone whispered my name. Every head swiveled toward me. My throat closed. What did you just say? I managed to whisper. Sabrina held up a folded paper, the DNA results. I had the test done, she declared. Louis had O negative blood. Clara's is A positive. The test confirms there is no biological connection. Sabrina, stop this madness, my aunt shouted, standing up. This is a funeral. But Sabrina's tone sharpened. This is about truth, Margaret. Louis built his empire on integrity. He would want honesty, even now. My hands trembled as I rose. You had no right. I had every right, she snapped, turning to me. You've lived off his name, his wealth, his reputation when you had no claim to any of it. Her words sliced me open. The guests stared, unsure whether to pity or believe me. Liam sat frozen, his head bowed, refusing to meet my eyes. "Say something, Liam," I pleaded. "You know me." But he didn't look up. He just whispered, "Mom, please stop." Sabrina's gaze flickered to him, then hardened. "No? This ends today." Tears blurred my vision. I stepped forward, my voice shaking. "You've taken everything from me. My peace, my father, my dignity. But you won't take his memory." I turned to the priest, to everyone watching. "You can believe whatever you want, but I was there for him. Every late night, every hospital call, every word of encouragement he gave me, that was real. Blood doesn't define love." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the priest gently cleared his throat. "Let us continue with the service," he said softly. "Mr. Whitmore deserves peace." Sabrina's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. She turned, lifted her chin, and walked back to her seat. The ceremony ended in awkward silence. People avoided my eyes as they passed me, some sympathetic, others skeptical. When the church emptied, I stood alone by the coffin. I pressed my palm against the polished wood. "Dad," I whispered, "I don't know what the truth is anymore, but I'll protect what you built, I promise." Outside, the sun had begun to fade behind gray clouds. The day that started in brightness ended in shadow, and deep down, I knew the real storm hadn't even begun. A week after the funeral, Austin's sky hung heavy with rain. The city felt muted, gray, like even the weather knew something was about to change. I stood outside the sleek glass building of Eugene Shaw and Associates, my father's law firm for nearly 2 decades. My hands were cold despite the heat. It wasn't just nerves, it was dread. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Everyone was already there. Sabrina sat at the long oak table in a tailored black suit, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable behind a thin veil of calm. Liam sat beside her, eyes fixed on the floor, his fingers twitching restlessly. Across from them, my Aunt Margaret, Uncle Henry, and a few company board members murmured quietly. When they noticed me, the room fell silent. Eugene Shaw, my father's lawyer, silver-haired, kind-eyed, meticulous, gestured to the empty seat across from Sabrina. "Clara," he said softly, "thank you for coming. We'll begin." I sat down, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. Eugene placed a thick folder on the table. "This is the last will and testament of Louis Whitmore," he announced, voice steady. "It was updated 6 months before his passing and is legally binding." He opened the document and began reading. "I, Louis Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, leave all operational control, holdings, and assets of Whitmore Energy to my daughter, Clara Whitmore." The words echoed in the still room. Sabrina's chair scraped violently against the floor as she shot to her feet. "This is a mistake," she hissed. "You can't mean her." "It's written clearly," Eugene replied calmly. "Your husband's intentions are explicit." "He didn't know," Sabrina snapped. "He didn't know she wasn't his daughter. I have proof." She yanked a folded document from her bag, the DNA report, and slammed it on the table so hard that the sound made everyone flinch. "Read it," she cried. "Louis was O negative, Clara's A positive. She's not his child. If he'd known that, he would never have left her everything." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The humiliation from the funeral replayed in my mind like a nightmare. But then Eugene lifted one hand, calm and deliberate. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I anticipated you might say that." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller envelope, yellowed, sealed with wax, my father's handwriting across the front. "This," Eugene said, holding it up, "was left with me by Mr. Whitmore. It was labeled, 'To be opened only if anyone ever questions my daughter's bloodline.'" Every eye in the room turned to him. The air grew so thick you could hear the rain tapping against the windows. Sabrina's face drained of color. What is that?" "His final letter," Eugene said. He broke the seal slowly. The crack of wax sounded like thunder. He unfolded the paper, and his voice softened as he began to read. "To whom it may concern, I, Louis Whitmore, write this with full awareness of the truth. Years ago, after my wife passed, I learned that I was medically infertile. When Clara was born, I knew she could not be mine by blood, but I never needed proof. From the moment she called me dad, she was my daughter. She carries my spirit, my values, and my love. That is all that matters. I raised her as my own, and I leave her my legacy not by chance, but by choice. My vision blurred. Every line he wrote felt like a heartbeat returning to life. Eugene paused, then turned the page. One more note, he said quietly. For the sake of fairness, I must also reveal that Liam Whitmore is not my biological son. Sabrina had an affair in the early years of our marriage. I forgave her for the family's sake, and chose silence over scandal. But I can no longer let lies define my legacy. Family is not made by blood, but by the loyalty of those who stay. The room went completely still. Sabrina's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her face turned white, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself against the table. Liam's eyes widened in disbelief. Mom, is that true? Sabrina looked at him, and for the first time, her mask cracked. Liam, but he pulled away from her touch. Eugene folded the letter gently and set it back on the table. This document is legally verified and notarized, he said firmly. The will stands as written. All assets and operational control of Whitmore Energy go to Miss Clara Whitmore. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. No one moved. My heart pounded in my ears as Sabrina slowly sank back into her chair, face ghostly pale. For years she'd used lies to control the family, to wound me, and in a single letter, my father had shattered her entire empire. I wiped my eyes, stood, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Outside, the rain finally stopped, and for the first time in years, the sky didn't look gray, it looked free. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Heiress, not by blood. Whitmore Empire shaken by family scandal. Stepmother exposed in shocking will revelation. Every headline screamed my name, Clara Whitmore, like a curse and a crown all at once. I stopped counting the calls from journalists after the first 50. Reporters camped outside the Whitmore estate, cameras flashing through the iron gates. I could barely leave the house without hearing whispers. Inside, the silence was heavier than ever. Sabrina and Liam had moved out that night. No goodbye, no message, just empty rooms and a faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. Dad's study became my refuge. His old leather chair still held the imprint of his life, the faint smell of cedar, the stack of papers he'd left untouched on his desk. His glasses rested next to the letter Eugene had read aloud. I kept rereading the words. She carries my spirit, my values, and my love. Each time, they felt heavier, like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The next week, I returned to Whitmore Energy. The main office was quiet when I walked in. Employees glanced at me, some curious, some sympathetic, some uncertain. Whispers followed me down the hallway. That's her, the daughter, who's not really his. Can she handle it? I kept my head high, pretending not to hear. If my father could endure decades of scrutiny and still build an empire, I could survive this. At my first board meeting as CEO, I faced a row of wary eyes. Executives who once praised me now shifted in their seats. The air crackled with tension. "Thank you for being here," I began, forcing my voice steady. "Yes, I've seen the headlines. Yes, I know what's being said. But Whitmore Energy didn't become what it is because of gossip. It became what it is because of hard work, loyalty, and belief. The same values my father built this company on, and those haven't changed." A few heads nodded. Most stayed silent. When the meeting ended, the CFO, Marcus Hale, a stern but fair man who'd worked with my father since the beginning, lingered behind. "Clara," he said quietly, "you've got guts. But you can't do this alone. The company's unstable. Investors are nervous. We need a restructuring plan, and fast." I nodded. "Then let's find someone who can help." Marcus studied me for a moment before replying. "I know someone, Elena Moore. Smart, sharp, used to run strategic audits for major energy firms in Dallas. If anyone can help stabilize Whitmore Energy, it's her." I hesitated, then said, "Call her." 3 days later, I met Elena in the executive office. She was in her early 30s, tall and poised, with intelligent brown eyes and an aura that radiated quiet confidence. She shook my hand firmly. Miss Whitmore, I've read the reports. You've been through hell, but companies don't die because of bad press. They die because of weak leadership, and you don't strike me as weak." Her words stunned me. No one had said that to me since Dad died. "Then let's rebuild it," I said. And we did. Long nights bled into early mornings. We reviewed contracts, cut deadweight partnerships, modernized old stations, and launched sustainability programs. For the first time in months, I felt alive again, like I was doing what my father had prepared me for all along. The headlines shifted. Whitmore Energy restructures under new CEO. Clara Whitmore implements bold reforms. But even as success returned, loneliness lingered. Every victory felt half empty without my father's quiet nod of approval. Sometimes, when I stayed late in his office, I'd whisper, "We're getting there, Dad. I promise." And somewhere in that silence, I liked to think he heard me. It had been 3 months since the will was read. The company was stabilizing, revenues were recovering, and I was finally learning to breathe again. But peace never lasts long in my world. That morning, my inbox blinked with a message I almost deleted without reading. The sender's name froze me in place. Liam Whitmore. The subject line was simple. "Clara, we need to talk." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Clara, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I should have defended you that day at the funeral. I should have stopped Mom. But I didn't, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. After the truth came out, I left with her because I didn't know what else to do. Now I see that running away made me no better than her. I'm coming back to Austin. Not for money, not for the company, but to earn back your respect. I want to work for Whitmore Energy and build what Dad started. Please give me a chance, Liam." I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was anger. How dare he ask for forgiveness after standing silent while I was humiliated? But beneath the fury was something heavier: sorrow. For all her cruelty, Sabrina had raised him. He was as much her victim as I had been. When I told Elena, she listened quietly, then leaned back in her chair. "You've rebuilt your father's company, Clara. Maybe it's time to rebuild your family too." I frowned. "You think I should forgive him?" "Forgiveness isn't about them," she said softly. "It's about freeing yourself." Her words stuck with me. So, a week later, I agreed to meet him. We chose a small cafe downtown Neutral Ground. When Liam walked in, I barely recognized him. Gone was the smug, spoiled boy who once rolled his eyes at me across dinner tables. He looked older, leaner, his face worn by guilt. He stopped a few steps away. "Clara." I nodded, gesturing to the seat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like years of unspoken words pressing against the air. Finally, he said, "I know I don't deserve it, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. For everything. For not speaking up. For letting Mom use me. For believing her lies." I folded my hands together, watching him carefully. "Do you even understand what that day did to me?" He swallowed hard. "Yes. I think about it every night. And I'll keep thinking about it until I make it right." "Then why come back now?" I asked. "What do you want?" He met my gaze, steady this time. "A chance to work. To prove I'm better than what she made me. To carry Dad's legacy the right way." There was no arrogance in his voice. Just sincerity. I sighed. "You'll start at the bottom," I said finally. "No special treatment. You'll learn every part of this company like I did." His eyes widened slightly. "You mean it? One mistake, and you're out." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." That afternoon, I told Marcus to assign Liam to the original Whitmore Energy Station, the first one Dad ever built. He'd start as a trainee, working alongside the staff. No titles, no privileges. When the news spread, employees whispered again, but this time, it wasn't scandal. It was curiosity. Weeks passed. I visited the station unannounced one day, and there he was in uniform, wiping grease off his hands, laughing with customers. He looked free. A man finally building something of his own. As I turned to leave, he called out, "Hey, Clara." I looked back. "I know it'll take time," he said quietly, "but I'll make you proud." I smiled, small, but real. "Then start by making yourself proud." That night, as I drove home, the setting sun spilled gold across the city. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. A full year passed, and for the first time in my life, peace didn't feel like a stranger. Under my leadership, our leadership Whitmore Energy flourished again. Liam proved himself with quiet determination. He worked his way up from the gas stations to the logistics team, never once asking for shortcuts. When employees learned who he was, he didn't deny it, he just said, "Judge me by my work, not my name." People respected that. Soon, the same company once fractured by scandal began to see us not as broken siblings, but as partners. Elena became more than an advisor. She was the calm voice that steadied me when the weight of legacy felt unbearable. Together, the three of us rebuilt the heart of my father's empire not on bloodlines, but on trust. We launched Project Horizon, an initiative to bring sustainable fuel solutions to underfunded communities across Texas. The media that once called me the daughter without a name now wrote headlines like, "Whitmore Energy redefines family and future." I still remember one evening, after a long board meeting, standing outside headquarters. The city lights shimmered across the glass walls. Liam leaned against the hood of his truck, smiling at me. "You know," he said, "Dad would have loved this view. He would have complained about the numbers first," I joked. We laughed an easy, genuine laugh that neither of us thought possible a year ago. Then his tone softened. "Clara, thank you for giving me another chance." I looked at him, really looked at him. Gone was the resentment, the bitterness, the boy raised by ambition. All that remained was my brother. "You earned it," I said simply. "And for what it's worth," he added quietly, "you were always Dad's favorite. Not because you worked harder, but because you loved him the way he needed to be loved." I didn't know what to say. So, I just smiled through the sting of tears. The 30-year anniversary gala. 6 months later, the company celebrated 30 years of Whitmore Energy. The grand hall glittered with lights, cameras flashing as employees, partners, and family filled the room. It felt surreal standing on the same stage where my father once stood, delivering speeches about growth and grit. Now it was my turn. I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounding. The crowd hushed. Behind me, a massive portrait of my father watched over the event, the same determined smile that once both inspired and intimidated me. "When my father built this company," I began, "he built it on a belief that family is earned, not inherited. He believed in loyalty, in hard work, and in forgiveness." I glanced toward the front row where Liam sat beside Elena. He nodded, smiling. "A year ago, I stood before you all, not as a CEO or an heiress, but as a woman doubting her place in the world. Today, I know who I am. I am Louis Whitmore's daughter, not by blood, but by love." A hush swept through the room, then a wave of applause. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. I continued, voice trembling but strong. "My father taught me that legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about who you leave behind, the people strong enough to carry your spirit forward. And that's what we'll keep doing. Together." The applause grew louder until it filled every corner of the hall. As the lights dimmed, I looked at the portrait again. For a fleeting moment, I could almost hear his voice, calm, steady, proud. "I told you, Clara, you'd do just fine." Tears burned my eyes. But this time, they didn't hurt. They healed. Later that night, when the guests were gone, I drove to the first Whitmore Energy station, the one Dad built decades ago, the same one where Liam had started over. The neon sign buzzed softly in the darkness. I stepped out of the car, feeling the warm Texas wind brush my face. I touched the old sign, tracing the faded letters. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "Family isn't about blood. It's about who stays, who forgives, and who loves even after the truth hurts." Behind me, Liam's truck pulled up. He got out, smiling tiredly. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Just saying goodnight," I said. He joined me in silence, both of us staring at the glowing sign that had outlasted everything. For once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. And for the first time since my father's funeral, I finally felt home.